All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series. I'm George Ozoude of Time Health Capital alongside Fasanya of Dr. Breathe Easy Capital. Today, we have my friend Bronson Hill of Bronson Equity on to give us insights on how physicians can become general partner or GP in syndication investments. I've known Bronson for over 2 years and have had many discussions with him from healthcare to real estate investing. He has built a great syndication company that invests in multiple real assets, including single-family, residential, and ATMs. He has raised over 20 million in capital to date. He does a fantastic job creating content and facilitating events that serve to educate the community on many topics, including investing, finance, and macroeconomics. So we are excited to learn from him tonight, especially because he's worked with many physicians in the past, both on the healthcare side as a former med device rep and now on the syndication side. So with that, we'll let you take it away, Bronson.
Awesome, George. Really happy to be here. Excited to chat. You've also given me a lot of health advice over the years, which I've appreciated. Just different little things I've had, but awesome. It's great to be able to share with everyone today. Anybody watching this on a replay, we're actually on a little family vacation, so outside Legoland now. So just getting back into the work swing of things here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and jump into it. If you do have any questions, you can just jump in and let me know. But basically, this is going to be becoming a GP as a physician, becoming a general partner. So we're going to jump into that. And again, I may not get through everything that I have here, but I'm excited to be able to share. And hopefully this provides a lot of value and really gets you closer to what your goals are as a physician. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is becoming a GP or a general partner as a physician. And I'm just going to share a little bit of my story, it's actually about 35 million now. So we've raised about 35 million. So I guess that's an older bio that I had on there. But this is coming from a presentation that I had created of how to leave your job within 3 years. How to replace your income, your working income with passive income. Also have a book coming out shortly. Remember my last day of work. So I was a medical device sales guy for about 10 years, ended up in cardiology sales, working with PAD and CAD stuff in the cath lab. And I just remember the feelings of knowing my income was covered, that I didn't have to, or even I should say my expenses were covered. There's different forms of financial freedom. One is obviously you can replace your income, which obviously for a lot of physicians, that's a higher number. But if you, depending on how you live, how modestly or if you live extravagantly or modestly, that depends how that looks to cover your expenses. So that really is your rat race number, right? How do you cover that number? And it all, for me, began with that decision of saying, okay, within 3 years, I want to leave my job. So whatever your goal is, it does begin with a single decision. And as Tony Robbins would say, it's in your moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. So I made that decision about 5 years ago, was able to leave my job about 2 years ago and be able to be full-time in real estate. This is a little bit of who I am, my background. My company's called Bronson Equity. As George said, we do a lot of webinars. We have a podcast called The Mailbox Money Show. We raise money for multifamily apartments. I'll get into my bio here. We have over 200 million in multifamily real estate assets, over 2,000 units, 35 million raised. We do have our educational platforms, our YouTube, and then we have a large in-person meetup that we do monthly in Glendale, California called ITI, or Investor to Investor meetups in Southern California. I love to connect. We've raised also for oil and gas, for ATMs and car washes. So we're raising for other types of things, fund to funds type of model. So really the time for money trade, again, this might be a little more general. And I know I'm going to get into kind of specific topic here in a minute, but one thing that really inspired me to look at real estate and look at basically how do I get out of this time for money trade? Because I realized there's a couple of physicians, a couple of cardiologists I worked with, they were working 60 or 80 hours a week and they were making over $3 million a year, but it didn't to me feel like financial freedom. To me, financial freedom felt like I had the option to be able to work how I wanted, when I wanted. And I think as a physician, that's what becoming a general partner will allow you to do. It allows you to scale your wealth. There's different ways to be able to do it. We'll talk about the 3 options, how people do that usually. And kind of remember, this is going to be really heavy on how to raise money, just because I think that it's the path that I've chosen, but I think it's also the one that's really the most compelling for physicians for a number of reasons. For most physicians, obviously everybody's situation is a little different, but I just wanted to jump into that and share that. So I was making, again, for physicians, this is a low number, but I was making $200K per year, working 30 hours a week, and I was paying taxes at 25 to 30%. A lot of physicians I know, especially in California, are paying over 50% taxes. The highest state tax rate here is 13.3%. And so there are some secrets to reducing taxes and things like that as well. But really the question is for you, what does financial freedom mean to you? I love to travel. This on the left here, this is in Patagonia, Chile in December. I do these Spartan races, or I pay money to go get punished physically. And then in the lower right, this is just a cause I believe in, human trafficking, and try to stop human trafficking. So really, this is the heart of what I'm going to say. I'm going to stop here on this slide for a little bit, but what are the GP options as a physician? There's several main options that I think, actually there's four of them, really main options, things you can do. I think one that most folks don't have, but I think some physicians will have, is this key principal option. If you're not familiar with what a key principal it is, it typically means somebody comes in, they'll have a higher net worth, typically net worth of, I would say, a few million or higher, and they can sign on loan docs. Maybe they have some experience owning other sorts of real estate, and you can get basically a percentage. It could be 2%, 5%, 10% of a deal, and become a general partner just simply for signing on loan docs and having a certain amount of net worth. So that's like a net worth piece. And there are a lot of groups that need somebody to be a key principal to sign on loans, and it is an option that's out there. So if you have net worth, that's something I think you always want to say when you go to events, when you go to things, if you know, just that you have a certain net worth, that you can actually be a key principal and you can actually be able to sign on loan docs. So that's something, I have a friend who does this. He's not a physician, but he calls it basically, it's like free money. You just basically sign on loan docs, or it's a non-recourse debt. So if you were to sign on loan docs, it doesn't, if a deal does go south, I think it may look you bad, may make you look a little bad when it comes to the lending situation or lenders, but there's no recourse on any other assets. So that's one option. If there's questions on that, we can jump into that. Raising funds, we're going to get into that, kind of how that works, particularly as a physician. And also you can be finding deals or operating. There are some physicians that I know that actually operate deals, or they have a team that helps operate deals. I would say finding deals, it's a lot of work. And I would say for most physicians, the money that you make per hour is probably not worth it to be out finding deals, but some people really enjoy that and they want to do that, or they want to be on the operations side. I personally think raising money is the most attractive and easiest way, particularly because as a physician, a lot of other physicians, and you have an insider relationship with them. A lot of physicians, in my experience of 10 years working with physicians and medical sales, they're always getting pitched something. Somebody's always showing up with a product, or they're showing up with something that they're trying to give to, hey, buy this, buy that. And they're always hearing about deals. And so I hear there's a lot of physicians are always getting pitched. But if you're a physician and you're just simply educating other physicians, what George is doing as well, and what this webinar is about, is just basically educating other folks, and there's a lot of value that comes from that. We see it. I think Dr. Peter Kim is another one. There's some other ones that do a lot in this space, White Coat Investors, some of these folks that do a lot just to try to provide value in that space. So there's some options there. Okay, so going on to the next part here, I got some extra slides here. So basically, I talked about this, the formula really when it comes to investing. And again, you don't have to be a GP simply by saying, okay, I'm going to raise money, I'm going to have some active role. There are actually also ways, if you bring enough money to a deal, let's say you are a physician, you've got a practice, you've got a high net worth, you can simply say, hey, I want to invest $500K in a deal and I want you to make me a general partner. A lot of groups would consider that. They consider somebody who has a large amount of money coming in to actually just be a general partner, just simply by bringing more capital. So you actually basically can be a passive investor somewhat, and yet come in with a higher amount. And that's another way you can negotiate a general partner position. Now, why would you want to be, let's just talk about that for a second. Why would you want to be a general partner? It'll get you experience. It gets you experience in the management side. You can actually have more access to operators. You typically have a little more control over a deal. And it just gets you some experience. So if you're looking to raise money, you're looking to do deals yourself. If you have not been a general partner, there's a huge change that happens once you've been a general partner on a deal. Once I raised $100,000 for my first deal, things started to change. So that's a big deal. I mentioned this before, the rat race number, whatever your rat race number is for me, I lived pretty simply. So it was 50, 60K, it would be higher now, but being able to replace that and grow your cash flow over time. Once your cash flow or your passive or even your GP income coming in is higher than your living expenses, then you're free and you can choose how you want to work, when you want to work. Maybe you don't necessarily want to quit your job necessarily like I did, but maybe you just want to have more freedom that you can work on your terms, how you want, when you want, or people have all different types of goals. There's also the option, like I mentioned, to passively invest. If you have time, you have money. If you have money, you can just passively invest. You can start with the goal of developing confidence to invest passively. And then over time, you invest more without increasing your expenses. I think this is a thing I see for a lot of physicians, is that the more money they make, or there's a lot of pressure on physicians to have a certain level, drive a certain car, live in a certain neighborhood, go be a part of a certain club. And it's a lot of pressure. So if you can try to, especially if you live in the high, like a place like LA or someplace, or in New York or somewhere where it's a very expensive cost of living, it's hard to really increase your wealth without increasing your expenses. And so that's something to really consider if you're looking to be financially free. And then this is kind of where we're going to talk about the idea of if you have time or if you're able to leverage your time. And I think it is very worthwhile to learn how to raise money. As you heard it said, it makes money, it takes money to make money. And it's true, but it just doesn't have to be your money. So that was for me. I learned about syndication. I didn't have the money to invest or to buy an apartment building myself. But what I was able to do is I was able to really learn about syndication. And then since then, I've been raised about 35 million for different projects and learned a ton of stuff over time. This was a couple single family houses I did at first. It's kind of a little bit of my story, just kind of how I got started. I'm going to touch on this for a minute, and then we're going to get into questions in a bit. But I bought these houses in another state. I thought I'd become financially free using single family investments. The cash flow was very poor. It was a lot of work. They weren't the best tenants. These three houses were actually in Cleveland. And I realized that for me, looking into multifamily could be a better option. So this was a relative named Wes, who actually George has met as well, spent some time with him. I think you guys went scuba diving together. And very high net worth guy, didn't really know much of his story. He said, hey, I want to get 30 of these houses. This is my goal, is to get 30 of these houses. And he's a multifamily guy. He's like, why don't you do syndication, man? It's so much easier. And I said, well, have the money, you can raise the money. He's talking about syndication. So then we started a meetup, and this would be an option too for physicians. Again, what I'm sharing is going to be a track that's a little more focused on raising money, because that's what I know. And then once you learn how to raise money, you can raise money for lots of different things, and you can start vetting different types of deals, and it just opens up a lot of opportunities for you. So even if you had a small group of physicians, if you had a meetup that you had joined and you became a partner on somehow, and it's a little bit of work, but what it does is it puts you in the front of the room. For me, I was in the front of the room. This is when I started about a little less than 5 years ago. I was in the front of the room, and I didn't have any multifamily. I just had a few single families. And a guy at this first event comes up to me and says, hey, I'd invest in one of your deals. And I was like, are you talking to me? Like, what? I just knew he was talking to me, because I didn't have any deals, right? I was brand new to this, but because I was a leader in the space, again, I wasn't an expert, but I was a leader. He basically was interested in investing. And so we got coffee, and I connected with him with the same guy, a guy I met at this meetup as well. And I connected this guy who had money with somebody who had a deal. And so that's what this process is. Becoming a general partner, particularly in raising money, is just connecting people that have money with deals that look interesting. A side note on this, a really interesting way to get started is, let's say it feels a little awkward to be like hanging your shingle. Hey, I'm a cardiologist, or I'm a internal medicine. I'm going to start raising, like, how do I even approach my peers about that? What does that even look like? So what you can do is you can approach a deal sponsor, and I'd be happy to make an introduction to a couple deal sponsors that I know. I'm sure George knows some too, and you guys are deal sponsors. But you can say, hey, I'll invest some of my money. So I put in 50 or 100K, and then you can just pass it along to a couple friends with personalized emails, just saying, hey, John, I thought, I'm invested in this deal. I thought you might be interested, or I'd love to hear your thoughts. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I'm investing in this. And also I'm basically sharing with my friends, just, hey, it's something like I'm sharing with a friend. And so that's a side door into becoming a GP. So what you're doing is you've had a conversation with a sponsor, you're investing some of your own money. It may you only end up with what you put in. But if you get a few other people to invest, maybe you've raised 400 or 500K, you've got some experience, you get credit for the money that you get. Basically, as an investor, you get LP equity in the deal, you get GP credit for the money that you raised, and you get the GP credit for bringing other people in as well, which is some real positives, right? So that's a soft way to get started in it, where it doesn't feel too, I've got to be this money raiser person, be like, whoa, hey, what's going on here? I thought you were the best cardiologist in town or something. For me, this whole business is about partnerships. If you don't know Michael Blanc, he's a good guy. He's in multifamily space. I approached him, and basically a lot of the stuff is partnerships. And I watched even some physicians that have done very well. George and I have a friend named Tom Burns, who's raised, I think, $350 million. He's he had his medical practice, and then he had his office down the street. There was this whole practice, or his like real estate development company, basically. And so he had both, and you go back and forth. And so a partnership. So this was a partnership that I've created, was able to start raising big money. This guy, Michael Blanc, had a huge audience, and I was able to come alongside and say, hey, how can I help, or can I assist in these ways? In the beginning, you're working a little more for free. You're just doing it for the experience, but over time, that experience is very valuable. So once you can raise money, and I think especially as a physician, if you can navigate that, where you can say, hey, I can still keep my professionalism, and I can still do these deals on the side or have these other things going, it could be a real opportunity if you're able to navigate that well. So this is how I've done it over time, just created different resources. We have our podcast in the upper left called the Mailbox Money Show. We've had people like Ken McElroy and Buck Joffrey and Rod Khleif, and I don't know, just a bunch of fun folks on there. And then we basically have a YouTube channel. We do webinars kind of similar to this one. We bring experts in. You kind of see on the lower right here. And then I have an ebook. Ebooks are great for some sort of downloaded resource. If you have a website that's for, again, there's a little more to set up. And once you set it up, you drive people to your website and everybody downloads whatever you have. And this is my ebook is how to use inflation to your advantage. So if you do something, don't ever let it be like join my newsletter or something. Let it be something like, oh, I actually get something valuable when I download this. So we talked about this, replacing the formula. We talked about that. So these are kind of my best secrets on growing a syndication business. Would that be of help to you guys? We can go a different direction. Maybe you can just put in the chat if you think that would be helpful. Again, I'm happy to. And if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. I've got some things. I think we got 10 people on here, but I'd love to see if there's anybody. I think George would love to see it. Okay. So I'll share some stuff here that I think will be helpful. And
hey, Bronson, before you go into that, I just wanted to highlight just a couple of things and to ask you a couple of questions about some of the previous slides. Curious about underwriting. What do you see as the opportunity for folks to underwrite? How much time commitment do you think that might involve? Is it something feasible for a doctor to do on the side?
So your question is, when looking at new deals and stuff like that, underwriting to be able to figure out, is this a good deal for me or not?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a skill set to learn. So again, there's a process I think to commit to, because that you should really be treating other people's money better than you treat your own money. And I know some of us are really good with money. Some of us, we kind of spend money however we spend it. When we take money from other people, there's a legal obligation there. There's also just an experience obligation. You hear stories of somebody like Joe Fairless, who's a well-known multifamily guy, and he had a loss in one of his early deals. He actually went and found a way to pay back all the investors. Maybe it was a few years later, somebody paid back all the investors from a loss that he had in a deal, right? And that was a big deal. So underwriting is very important. There's a lot of people doing deals out there. There's a lot of people that are presenting themselves as operators, and some people have good experience, but I think it's definitely doable. I think you can commit to that part as well. There are ways you can learn about underwriting. There's ways you can learn about analyzing deals. There's some people sell deal analyzers where you can analyze a deal in about 10, 20 minutes. And then after a while, once you've seen a bunch of deals, you'll basically have an opportunity to just say, okay, what's the difference here? And there's a few levers I find, especially in multifamily deals, that you can really tell pretty quickly if a deal is conservative or not, right? So if a deal is conservative, typically it won't be a best case scenario. It won't be like 25% analyzed returns. Typically, it might be more like 12 to 16%. So something a little more conservative. The rent growth assumptions, they're not 20% a year, right? They're right these days, they might even be 3% a year, 2%. They might be just completely flat, right? Or the cap rate at exit, which is a valuation metrics, is just going to be more conservative. So it's instead of having a lower cap rate in the future, just assuming the cap rate is going to be the same or even higher than it is now. And so those are just different little things that you pick up over time. But I think it's something to commit to that, because when you start talking about deals, and if you don't know, it's fine. It's just when you were in training or whatever, you didn't know a certain thing, you just let me get back to you, whatever. So people get questions, and I would say, let me get back to you. And then it gives you a follow-up opportunity as well if you don't know the answer on something when you're working on a deal.
Yeah, I brought it up just because I gave a similar talk a few months ago, and surprisingly, some folks were interested in underwriting and they were curious about how that could fit into their day-to-day grind as a physician.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. For the KPs, I think you mentioned one downside about if the loan goes, if there's like a bad boy list or something like that. Are there any other downsides regarding KPs? If something goes wrong with the loan, with the deal?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say there are syndication attorneys out there that basically, typically when you're a KP, you work with someone, there'll be an attorney you work with. That's a good question for them. You also could just have a consult with an attorney. I have a great attorney I work with at a syndication. He typically does free consults when he's getting to know folks. I'm happy to make that introduction as well. But that's something that's a good relationship, just to know, okay, what are the downsides here? So your attorney over time is just a good person to bounce things off of if you're not sure. In general, I think, yeah, if you're a KP, if there was something that happened, could you potentially be named on a lawsuit? Probably could. I typically, before I do deals with any partners, really in any space, I typically run a background check on each of the partners, just to, really for myself and also for investors, to say, hey, I've done some diligence here, and I basically asked some more questions and things like that. But so I think that there is some potential downside, but I think it's somewhat limited, because I think even if there was some sort of lawsuit, you'd say, I didn't have access to the money, I didn't do this, and I just basically was helping out in these areas or this one or two areas. So I think it's different if you're managing the operating accounts versus, hey, I signed on the loans. I think that's a different thing. And because it's non-recourse lending, for those who aren't familiar, they can come, if something defaults, let's say you buy something with a recourse loan, they can come and take your house, they can take your assets, they can basically take everything. If it's non-recourse, they can't, there's no way they can take anything that you have, right? So there's no financial thing beyond what's in the deal. So I think that's a positive, but I would say developing a relationship with an attorney is a valuable thing. So I'm happy to make an introduction for folks. I'm sure you guys have something you work with as well.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's way more upside than any downside. For
Limited downside. Yeah.
And then last question. Oh yeah,
I want to piggyback on that. So most of the deals we do currently is actually recourse, because many of the non-recourse loans are actually at a higher interest rate. I'm just wondering though, is all your deals non-recourse?
Yeah, all of our deals are non-recourse in real estate. The reason why is once you get to a certain loan size, it's easier to get, especially agency debt. I think it's 1.2 or 1.4 million. Over a certain amount, all the debt basically becomes non-recourse. And when you have syndication, one of the prerequisites, I would say, like I would never invest in a deal that's syndicated, put 50 or 100K into a deal that is recourse, because then they can come after my assets. So part of the thing of it being attractive to limited partners or LPs is the fact that it's non-recourse. So I would say in general, if a deal is a recourse deal, typically you only see that in really small deals, or it's a JV or a partnership type of thing. There are deals that are larger size that have recourse in them. It's just, I think it's so available a lot of times to get non-recourse that I think as long as your deal size is large enough, I just think there's really no reason to do recourse, because you're also gonna have a harder time raising money. You're gonna have a harder time. So if it's all you can get, you do it. But it's just, I think there's so many options out there that are non-recourse that make much more sense.
Okay, we'll talk more about the agency debt soon. One-on-one later.
Okay, yeah, happy to share. Absolutely.
And I was just
Sure.
saying one last question, just comparing LP returns and GP returns. I know you mentioned for KPs, you can get on the GP side at anywhere from 2 to 10%. What about the capital raising side? What does that look like as far as ranges?
Yeah, so it's this is all negotiated, and it's with capital raising, it's an interesting gray area. And what I mean by this is the SEC has said you can raise capital and be a part of a deal. The challenge is you just can't be functioning as a broker dealer. And so in my past, I was actually a registered investment advisor. So when you're registered, you have a certain licensure, there's a lot of compliance, there's certain things you have to do, there's tests, there's stuff, and it makes it more difficult. I was just like, why doesn't everybody get licensed? It's just every single piece of content you put out then has to be approved, and it's just a real pain. But you can receive fees on things. You can receive just, hey, I raised this much money, or I did this certain deal, I raised for this fund, and I can get a percentage of what you raised. When it comes to real estate or other deals, you can't just be like a gun for hire capital raiser. It's not really allowed. So it's a gray area where typically the groups that I've worked with, where again, I'm not directly an operator, I'm part of the asset management team. I'm a general partner on these deals, but I'm not usually the one who's having the direct management calls, and like I'm on those sometimes. But so how it works is typically they'll have a guideline where it's usually around 25 to 35% of the general partner shares go to the equity. So meaning, let's say it was a $10 million raise, our group raised all 10 million, then I would expect typically around 30%, 25 to 35% of the total general partner shares. And so that's just the split. So for a common simple structure, some deals are like 80-20, right? So 80% of profits go to the limited partners and 20% go to the general partner. So if I had 30%, let's just say, of all of the equity, or 30% of the general partner shares, that means I get 6% of all of the profits based on, because it was like 20%, or I guess if my math is right, yeah, 6% of the profits going forward.
And yeah, I bring that up just to make sure everyone understands that there are some SEC regulations that we have to be aware of. I think combining being investor relations, capital raiser, you can even be a KP on top of all of that, protects you. So you're not just seen as a capital raiser on these deals. So that's probably an option for many physicians.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, because you can't be like, I raised this money and this is all I did, whatever. So that's why, like, whenever I raise money for a deal, I always visit the property first. I do my own diligence, my own underwriting. I typically put my own money in the deal. I have risk capital that if something goes south, at least I've got some money in the deal, skin in the game there. And then I invest kind of long-term with the deal. I'm part of the asset management team. And there's two different functions. One is capital raising, which is bringing the money in. And the other is investor relations, right? Which is after a deal closes. So those are two different functions, right? So there's maybe 5 different functions I'm a part of. I'm not the primary asset manager, but I'm still involved, and I didn't find the deal. But those are some ways I try to stay compliant. But if anybody ever sends you a letter of, hey, you raised this, puts it in an email or something and says, hey, you raised this much, I'll pay you this much, whatever. That's a little bit of a flag, just to be like, if this person's doing this, the SEC, if they ever have an inquiry into that, was willing to pick up the phone and have a conversation about, hey, generally, this is what we do for people. And if you're raising money, it's just great to try to develop long-term partnerships. So we've had one group we've done 6 deals with. It's worked out well. But with new groups, you're always trying to figure out how you work together.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other questions before we move on? All right.
Okay, we can keep going here. So these are some of my top secrets for a syndication business. We got the menacing or the evil looking badger here, or the raccoon. Okay, let's see if I can do this with. Okay, here we go. Gonna go to the next slide. Here we go. So these are just a few tips that I've learned about raising money. Is this quote: "Make yourself valuable to valuable people." I think any way you can make yourself valuable to people is helpful, and especially being a physician, there's ways through partnerships, through helping investors, and through education. It's wonderful. Now, a great way for physicians to be of value is figure out how can you help people reduce taxes. There were 2 medical professionals. These guys were actually dentists in California, and they had a $5 million practice that they sold. They sold for $5 million. It was 2 locations. This was last year in 2022. Their tax bill was $2.4 million, and they were able to get their tax bill down to $125K. It would have been 0 actually, but because they're in California, there was some issues with that. But they basically, both of their wives became real estate professionals, which is if anybody has a spouse that doesn't work or is part-time or something, to get somebody to become a real estate professional is a real powerful designation because it allows you to use depreciation against ordinary income. So there's some creative things you can do. There's also some things in the energy space that allow for, such as oil drilling and other things that allow for reduction of actual ordinary income. A lot of physicians, especially those that make a lot of money, maybe in your whatever your field or area you're in, the area you live in, the hospitals you work with, you'll know some that are just uber successful, but a lot of these guys will be paying 30, 40, 50, 60% taxes. And so if you can come in and say, hey, how do you reduce your taxes? What are the things you're doing? And you present some solutions, that's a real great in. A lot of people, so you're not only getting the money from the returns from the deal, they're getting all this taxable savings either by deferring or being able to use that. So just making yourself about value, trying to figure out what the need is and trying to help solve that. As a syndicator, have you seen the movie Office Space? But maybe you feel this way sometimes as a physician. I think the Bob's here, they were talking to this guy and they're saying, what would you say you do around here? And I feel like that sometimes as a syndicator, I'm doing podcasts and I'm doing this and I'm talking to people and I'm looking at deals and it's all these different things you're doing. But there's a few things that are really a couple things you can do in your real estate business. And it really is a real estate business. If you want to be anything more than a limited partner, anything as a general partner, you have a real estate business. So it's interesting to it's important to try to shift that to be like, okay, this is a business for me, right? I need to treat this as a business. And what are those actual activities that you do? As my friend Russell Gray, George knows Russ as well. He basically says these things, he says, build your business and build your brand. These are the 2 things you can do. Building your business has to do with the processes, the operations, what does it actually look like? What are the deals you're doing? That type of part. Second thing, and this is probably, especially when you're first starting, is most important, is really building your brand. And how do you actually build your brand? There's specific things you can do, and everybody has a brand. If you show up in a meeting and your hair's disheveled, you're sitting in the back with your arms folded and half fallen asleep, like that says something about you, right? Versus if you show up, you're dressed professionally, you're engaged in a meeting, whatever. We all know people that have a reputation, and that really becomes their brand, right? So your brand, as you develop a brand in real estate, you develop a brand for what you're doing. It's really important that what you're saying is very consistent with what you do. I want to show this quick example. So I started a few years ago. This was actually 2.5 years ago, January of 21. I had this 2021 multifamily outlook event. It was me and 40 slides. I thought it was going to be great. I invited everybody I knew, and I think I had 14 people show up, including my mom. It was like really not a big hit at all. I was really disappointed. I was like, man, what's going on here? I keep trying to do something great. And what I realized is with this, there's a huge difference between being an employee, and I don't know how many physicians here are employees and how many are just on their own with their own practice or part of a group or whatever. But when you're an employee, if you make too many mistakes, what will happen? You'll get fired, right? They'll fight, the contract will go to somebody else, whatever. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to make a lot of mistakes and then quickly learn. So to me, like I just said, okay, this wasn't working. What can I do to build my brand? So what I did is I started associating with people that were a step, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. And I was able to really just ask for people that I wanted, right? Who's the dream team that I wanted to get out on a stage or a virtual stage? So this was 1 year later. This is 2021, 2022. This is the 2022 multifamily outlook event. You see, it looks a little different, right? Got some big names here. Michael Blanc has probably 40,000 people on his email list. Ken McElroy's got 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. Super well-respected guy. Rod Khleif. So it's just amazing as you associate yourself with other people. Then I'd get people from, these guys would all promote it. And people would just reach out and say, hey, I want to hear about your deals, whatever. So as you associate with other people that are at the next step, it actually brings your brand up as well. So that's something, if you can just figure out what your niche is and how you can bring people in, just like what you guys are doing here with this webinar, right? This is a really powerful thing you're doing to help build your brand as well. And then over time, you just try to associate with people that are really successful. Adam Taggart over here, he's got 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. This guy, Rick Rule on the bottom here, he's a billionaire. Mark Moss has, these guys have about 500,000 subscribers, each, George Gammon and Mark Moss. These just came through networking events, getting introduced to people, just asking. And then when you think like, well, why would one of these guys come on an event or come on a webinar that I would do? If you can just say, hey, I'll promote it in these ways, and these are the positive things that can happen, and these are the things that we've seen before, and sometimes these guys will share it. I actually had George Gammon, he sent out one of webinars we did, he sent it out to his list of 20,000 people. We went from having like 100 people sign up to 1,000 people signed up, right? So that stuff can happen, right? So it's just being associated with people, it can be really valuable. And then for them, they want to be on a stage that presents them like an expert, right? So this is one thing that really allows them to be presented.
Buck
like
Joffrey's on there too. He's a doctor, so that's a nice little highlight right there.
Yeah, and Buck Joffrey's raised like $700 million. So he's raised a lot of money, right? So if you were to talk to Buck, he would just say, yeah, just creating more value, creating things that physicians like, and just continuing to, and he associates himself with a lot of amazing people, right, on his podcast, which is good. And like I talked about this book here, this is a great book. I actually read this right before I quit my job, but it was just this idea of the entrepreneur mindset versus the employee mindset. There's a saying that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first. And that's really hard for me to do anything poorly. If you're like perfectionist or you like doing things well, but a lot of this stuff is you have to be willing to try new things. Again, if something doesn't work, then you shift and you try something else. And there's that quote from Michael Jordan that says, I missed 9,000 shots. I've taken the game winning shot 56 times and missed and whatever. And I keep failing. And that's why I'm successful, that we're willing to take shots. We're willing to make those mistakes. And so that's just the people that are the most successful are willing to do more. So we have a hand raise. Is it Gianni? Is that right?
Yep.
Just had a question. Thanks for all the details that you're giving. Quick question. So when you started, or how you deal with things now, let's say you had a new investor that you're approaching, and you don't actually have a deal right now. Are you presenting them with a sample deal deck and then asking them if you had something similar? Would they be interested? How do you approach trying to persuade or present a potential opportunity to like a new investor when you're capital raising or a new client?
Yeah, so we'll have a call with investors. I've had 1,500 one-on-one phone calls now, so I have a process that kind of helps to facilitate that. But I'll basically try to give them a heads up. This is how the process works. Your deals, they fill up quickly. Here's kind of how it goes, whatever. I think you should always be having calls and, hey, we don't have anything live right now, or we do working on stuff, whatever. But typically we'll have stuff open for a week or two and then it's done when we moved on to the next thing. So I'll just set the table for that with investors. But I think as a GP or somebody who's raising money, I think it's always good to raise money or to be in the process of almost teeing up investors to know what to expect before you have a deal. Because if you wait till you have a deal and then you say, hey, I've got a deal, whatever, like you haven't, the messaging, that onboarding process hasn't really happened. And it's almost, if I go to Starbucks or Chipotle, or I go to, let's say, whatever your favorite restaurant is in your town, you know what the food's going to be like, you know what the service is going to be like. There's an experience that they're selling that you're familiar with, right? So they know drink's going to be a certain way at Starbucks. They're going to be treating you a certain way, whatever. For you, they've never invested with you, right? They don't know how it's going to work. So you got to give them kind of that whole picture. Here's how it generally works. And if it hasn't happened, you say, this is how we work with our investors. This is how we work with our partners. And we answer questions. Then when we're ready, we have a deal that goes live with a webinar, and then it goes pretty quickly. There's no pressure to invest, but this is how the process works, right? So you just need to think about what that would look like. And if you've invested passively in deals, you can think about other processes that worked, and you're just setting the table. So it's almost as if these are teed up, ready to go. So when you have a deal, they know what to expect. It's not a surprise to them, right? It's not like you're just out of the blue saying, hey, I've got a deal, invest now. And they're like, I don't know what, okay, this is interesting, but I'm not really ready for that. So I think it's good to have those conversations early and often. Good question though. Okay, cool. We'll move on to the next one here. Things I wish I had done sooner. It's never about me or my deal. I think it's never about you. There's a vibe people put out sometimes that they need the money. And it's interesting, I'm sure, as a physician, and I was talking to somebody else about this too, that as a physician, there's really no other profession that I know of where it's, if just somebody's a physician, they're generally going to be like a very high earner, like a 200K to 2 million plus kind of earner. There's a lot of physicians make a lot of money. And so it may be interesting to like, I really never ask for money, right? I just simply say, we have these calls, we invite people to join our club. And then I just say, okay, we've got a live deal. We're really excited about it. We have very limited space. We put it out there. We have something in the oil and gas space that's coming out now, and I'm really excited about it. We actually do have a very limited space. So I'll put that out there. And then people are interested, they reach out. Somebody asked me, hey, do you make a bunch of calls, or do you how many calls do you make when you have a new deal? I was like, I really don't make any, I don't make any cold calls. I don't really call anybody. I just basically put it out and I just say, hey, this is the deal that we have. And if you're interested, join. So there's a vibe. It's a lot of people, if you're putting out the vibe, it's about you, that will really limit you. And then if you can really help people get at their financial goals, or maybe if it's not even if it's you, if you can just become a person of value at the last point there and refer them to somebody who can help them, that can be really valuable. I want to be sensitive to time. George, are we okay on time? Oh, looks like you're on mute there, buddy.
If people have questions, they can always type it in.
Yeah, and we're good on time. We have 15 minutes left.
Okay, awesome. So I'll just kind of go through these quickly. These are things I wish I had known sooner. Be a consultant, listen. Nobody wants to be sold, but everyone wants to buy. So if you can just simply ask questions and find a way, it's almost like when you're working with patients, right? You're trying to diagnose what's going on. Just when you're talking with people, just really focus on that exploratory thing of what are their symptoms. It's typically around taxes. It's around wanting to grow their passive income, or grow, what do I do with this money I'm making, or how those type of things. If you can find a way just to help people in that space that are peers, that could be really valuable. Solve problems. We talked about that. Under promise and over deliver. My assistant was really fun. Had a lot of fun with all these pictures of me. And then just start building a brand online. This can feel a little bit intimidating, but I think when you have an online presence, it goes from a one-to-one to a one-to-many. And I would say, as a physician, one thing that you have that's an advantage that other people don't is that people know if you're a physician, you're very smart. And so if you put yourself out there online, you get physicians, but you also get people that are retired physicians. You get people that are not physicians. You get people that are all different walks of life, just because they respect physicians, right? So it goes from a one-to-one conversation to a one-to-many. And then here's a couple things just real quick about building systems. I have two virtual assistants now. I've got a team of people now, but Neil Bawa, who works with Grow Capitalist, he's got there's Neil Bawa virtual assistant training. There's this 45-minute webinar. And he talks about how you hire a really good virtual assistant. It's a great training. It's awesome. It's free, but really anything that you're doing, that like a lot of our stuff is repeatable processes, right? So I basically create 4 or 5 videos a month. I recorded them, I think a couple of days ago. They go out to our team. They put all the tags in there. They do stuff on YouTube. They put it out there. It gets basically transcribed. This is all from our virtual assistant. Then it goes to our US-based writer that basically writes a blog. And that goes out as an email every week as well. So all this stuff gets repurposed. These are just repeatable processes. So I create 4 videos, then it goes to all these different places. So again, the goal is not just to be a person that does deals, but to actually build a business that does deals, right? So that's a real powerful thing, is if you can create some processes and systems around that, and you have people in place. And the nice thing about VAs is, my first VA, I think it was $5 an hour. Now she's making $9.50 an hour now. She's full time, but she does everything. And so this is her right here. This is the first one I hired, and she's been amazing. So all of the stuff you see online, all the thumbnails, all the stuff, she's does some graphic stuff as well. She helps run all of that. Right. So it's just an awesome thing that I've been able to set up to be able to do this kind of one-to-many thing. Talked about pitfalls, making it about me, don't make it about you. Inaction. A lot of people do like webinars like this, or they'll go at 10 things and they just don't do anything. As Tony Robbins said, it's in your moments of decision that actually things change. So when you actually make the decision, I actually made a decision last November, and I said, I'm going to write a book. And so it actually comes out in the next couple of months. I just basically the final edits on it. It's just about to come out. It's called Fire Yourself. Replace your working income with passive income in 3 years or less, right? So you make a decision to write a book, you make a decision to raise money, you make a decision to go to events, your life will begin to change. And as I've seen that personally with George's life as well, how that's changed as well. One pitfall is imposter syndrome. A lot of us, at least for me initially when I started, was like, who am I to be sharing all this stuff? And I don't have expertise in this. And I can probably be intimidating, I imagine, as a physician as well, because you have a very strong amount of training in one specific area, or in healthcare and in that specific specialty that you are. But what about real estate? Just for me, it was hard to put myself out there. What I realized is, for what each of you know about real estate, you probably know more than 95 to 99% of other physicians about real estate, right? Because you're in these meetings, you're learning, you're reading, you're doing all this stuff. And so just being able to put yourself out there as someone who actually can help people in this area, help solve problems. The other pitfall, quick, is being a Me Too person, being like, you've got a multifamily deal, I do too, or you've got an oil and gas deal, I do too. And so I've tried to do things that are a little different than other people. So just really find out what your niche is, what you do, and try to do that really well. You don't have to do everything. Just figure out what it is you want to do. What's the specific thing? Maybe you only provide high net worth and you only do KP stuff on big deals in certain areas. That's great. Be that niche, do that one thing. Or if you're going to raise money, only do it. We only do Jacksonville, Florida multifamily deals right now that are value add stuff built in the 70s. Like that's our multifamily stuff. And then we're doing other things in other spaces as well. So don't feel like you have to just kind of do everything. And then this is an important point. Hunting versus farming. I talked a little bit about that. You got Fast Eddie on the right here of going to a used car lot and just wanted to sell you a nice 1970 Buick, getting you in there. We've all experienced that, right? Farming is putting stuff out there. It's having calls. It's putting content out there, doing webinars like this one, doing things that are just providing value, providing tax help or strategy or those kind of things. And what happens as you do that, then the fruit will ripen in its own time. So you don't go up to the tree and say, okay, there's an apple in this tree and you see it and you just go try to yank it off there, right? You're going to go up and give it a gentle tug. And if it comes right off, you know, the fruit is ripe. If not, you let it and you let it stay there and you just keep planting and watering. And this is kind of how I've raised 35 million. Just continue to put things out there and you start to develop a reputation that you're someone that really adds a lot of value. So this is, I think, the kind of coming to the end here, and then we'll do a few more questions. So this is my daughter here. This is basically, we go on trips and go to Legoland and do fun stuff. Really involved in the human trafficking cause. I believe want freedom of time and travel and be able to create. So these are things that we do. So really you figure out what your why is, what you want to do and how this will help you get there. I think really helps center an individual. And so I think it's a really powerful thing. This is a free book that I have, How to Use Inflation to Your Advantage. If you want to download it, it is a free download, and then you can kind of hear about our future stuff. But I know we do have some comments here as well. And I see a couple things here from George. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just me tagging along, touching on points that you made, especially that last slide on your why. That's essentially your purpose. And that helps me with imposter syndrome. I always remind myself that the purpose is greater than the fear. And you had great examples of the purpose and why you push past that imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's something that if you have a strong why, it's amazing to me how when you start to put yourself out there and you start to see things grow, it's just, there's so much personal development work that goes into this. It's not just, hey, I do this and I just achieve these things in business. It's like, it's a whole new skill set, and it really requires a lot of courage and it requires a lot of just willingness to be in an awkward situation where you're navigating new things. And unless some of you have a background, you've raised lots of money and done different things. But for me, there's been some transitions like that where it's okay, this just feels really uncomfortable. When you're in a place where things are uncomfortable, you're growing. And so I think that's a really positive place to be.
Awesome, Bronson.
No, this is it. This is the last slide.
Awesome.
So
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Is there any way folks can reach out to you? I want to leave it on the chat and make sure. I see the Scan Me is there, but otherwise, let me give them a website or an email.
Yeah, you can. This will take you to my website, the Scan Me thing, or they can. If you want to send me an email, it's just Bronson Equity. I can even put it in the chat.
I got it. I got you.
You got it. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks, man. But yeah, happy to connect. Anybody, I think I talked about my attorney. I'm happy to introduce you to them. And having a good attorney is really helpful to navigate some of this. And he's got to have a kind of a free consult kind of thing if you have anything comes up. But there's just, I think it's all just the people you meet and the books you read, right? Just getting the content you need, learning how to do it, and then just connecting with the right people. There's so much out there. And I think I know physicians are very busy, but I think if you can find a way to just do it on the side, or even that whole trick of putting some money in a deal and then inviting others to do it, that's a way to do it without being a lot of work, especially to start.
Awesome. I'll again invite anyone to come off mute, ask any questions for Bronson, or you can leave them in the chat. We've got about 5 minutes left. And I'll take this moment just to remind folks that we'll have another webinar in 2 weeks. We'll be bringing on Josh Harmon, who's our acquisitions guy and property management. And he'll be talking about deals, a specific deal, and going through that deal because he's gone full cycle on it. So it'd be nice to see what going full cycle on a deal with the full exit and a sale with appreciation and full returns. Any other questions from the audience?
I just want to thank Bronson. Thanks for coming. I know you are a very busy man, writing a book and all. And congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. No, it's always great to be connected to good folks. And as I've known, it's good knowing you guys. And I've known George for the last 4 or 5 years has been great, and happy to connect. And we're all just, that's one thing I've really valued about the real estate community in general, is that there's a lot of people that are very collaborative and really want to help. And it's all here, it's all available. We can just learn from each other. So yeah, happy to connect.
Awesome. Thank you, Bronson. And thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. All right.